Hello and welcome to Raising Questions. Yet again, I take off my glasses because I'm reading here from The Week magazine, which presents the news of, guess what, the week. And I just want to comment on a few things and then make some sort of a transition into what's really much more important than just the events of the week, at least in my opinion. I've been struggling this time around to think of a way to get from politics and other social issues that we usually go into, raising questions and not answering too many of the questions, and connecting that to the things that are more important, like the things that Carl Jung talked about, the great psychiatrist, and Freud, and other people who are into meditation and the spiritual questions of life, simply because I'm asking, at least from my own personal point of view, and I think from a lot of other people's point of view too, following politics really isn't working out that well. Let's start out with one thing. There are always three things to get into. And the first thing to get into is what John Kenneth Galbraith, an advisor to JFK, said in a Playboy interview, believe it or not. I used to buy Playboy every month along with my friends because of the outstanding articles and interviews in that publication. And there really were a lot of them. And one interview among a series of famous interviews with people was with John Kenneth Galbraith, advisor to JFK, who said, he was an economist and political advisor, he said 5 words that are totally true and that sum up everything you need to know. The world is badly run. The world is badly run. How true. Read the Bible and check out some of the old stories in the Old Testament. It's all about the court. It's all about the kings, queens, this, that, and the other thing, and what a mess they're making of everything. A mess they're making of absolutely everything. We still have that. All right, here's dramatic proof, right from this stuff. This is many thousands of years later, and it's still the same go-around, at least 3,000 years later. Let's look at the Democrats and how they're attacking the president. Still, the Democrats don't like to say the president or President Trump. To them, it's an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms, and it just doesn't add up. So they launched this, I think, phony investigation a couple of years ago that was partially funded by the loser, Hillary, to undermine the government of the United States of America, believe it or not, and the presidency of President Trump. And we now know that Mr. Mueller, everybody knows who he is, the guy who examined the possible collusion between Trump and the Russians. Mr. Mueller said, we couldn't find any, at least nothing very convincing, and that means let's forget about it. But instead of that, the Democrats are still, sorry for the pun, trumpeting the non-news that there was collusion between Trump and the Russians. It's phony news. It's you have to use the expression fake news. Now, that doesn't undermine my credibility, believe it or not, as a fan of the senator from Vermont and his presidential ambitions. I'm still very much on that side rather than on the far right side or even the moderate right side. But you have to admit mistakes when mistakes are made. And the Democrats right now are making a tremendous mistake trumpeting that non-news that actually Trump is, in secret, an agent of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, not Russia, the Soviet Union. He's the last agent actually employed by Joseph Stalin. We know that. Now, that's not going to get any more votes for the Democrats, unfortunately, in the upcoming election. What the Democrats are doing is almost suicidal. It looks like they want to nominate right now, months and months and months in advance, it looks like they want to nominate the vice president under President Obama, named Biden. Biden makes 1 or 2 mistakes here and there and says that he actually worked together when he was working with Congress, that he actually worked together with people whose views he despised. He said he worked with some segregationists. Boy, there were some really lousy views in the U.S. Senate. Believe it or not, if you weren't around at that time, even lousier than the views currently on display right now in the U.S. Senate What we have basically is stupidity. That's the bad parts of the U.S. Senate, of the U.S. government. Stupidity. It used to be that it was much more stupidity with a real thick blend of evil, E-V-I-L, and segregationists, grown men, they were all men, grown men in the Senate saying, you know what, black people are inferior, and we have to keep them away from the superior people who are, guess what, just like the senator speaking. Well, this was actually the ideology of the United States of America until recently, of the United States of America. And Joseph Biden was around, and he had to work with these idiots. And he did, and he said so. And he worked with these idiots not in order to further segregation, but to let them know that they could work with him for progressive ideas. Well, instead of saying, thank you, Joseph, the other Democrats are saying, it looks like Joseph Biden actually is a slave owner. There are two things he has to do: give up his slaves and get out of the race. I needn't go into this any further. That's just one example of how the Democrats are shooting themselves in both feet. Well, they also have the stupidity of the media behind them. Stupidity, probably not evil. I was watching a famous news network just the other day, actually watching it on another network. But there was a guy who was criticizing, on behalf of the Democrats, I guess, he was criticizing the people who showed up for a monster rally for the president as the president was re-announcing or re-announcing that he wants to be president again. And the guy on this famous news network said that he implied that the people going to that rally were, let's just say, deplorable. He didn't say they were deplorable, but he said that they were actually people who, guess what, wear the wrong clothes. They wear flip-flops and cargo shorts. Boy, that indicates that there are a lot of people out there at that rally you don't want to invite to your next cocktail party. They are bad people. They will vote for Trump. Thank God there are only 2 or 3 of them. Well, that's not true. A lot of people wear clothes that are anathema to left-wing and progressive commentators. And it's just so sad that even today, a commentator could go on that kind of show and garner approval from the people he was around and saying, boy, people who vote for Trump don't even know how to dress up. What fools. Well, it turns out those fools are going to vote again. They're going to vote for Trump. And a lot more of them are going to vote for Trump, the so-called deplorables, than will vote for any Democrat. It's a weird, weird thing. The people in America who are not doing all that well, who are, let's say, in class 3, 3.5, or 4 out of 5 economic classes, who are not, in other words, part of the top 1%, those people, you would think, analytically, would vote for a progressive Democrat. But it turns out that a lot of them, the Trump voters we're talking about, the so-called deplorables, don't like the politicians who say, you know what, we've got to change society and change the government to help you all out. Well, it turns out they don't want big changes that the Democrats, the progressive Democrats, say they want. The progressive Democrats say they want to change society and government in order to help people who need help economically. Well, a lot of those people are fed up with the system and aren't even listening. And they're certainly not going to vote. That's number one. And number two, they like it the way it is, because the things that the progressive Democrats too often want to change are the very things that the so-called deplorables hang on to give their life some meaning, such as their religion, their customs, their habits, and so on. All those things from daily life, in other words, that are very, very important to millions and millions of people. And progressive Democrats too often just don't want to look at that and take it seriously. One thing they could do is take a look at, Carl Jung or other guys who write about meditation, and other guys who write, like Houston Smith, writes about the importance of religion. and not just to people who vote for Trump, but for a lot of intelligent people on top of that. The Supreme Court has just said in a 7-2 decision, in other words, in a broad-based, really solid decision, 7-2, they said, guess what? Just because a large cross, a Christian-looking cross, is on public territory, on a public cemetery, and dedicated to World War I soldiers, does not mean it has to be ripped up, blown up, moved, and forgotten about, even though it looks religious. In other words, the wall between church and state is not made of brick. It has some windows in it. It's made of basically brick, of course, but it has a lot of windows in it, and it's not even that tall. You can peer over the thing. That brings up a question. What does the Constitution say about the church and the state? Basically, the Constitution says nothing about it. It says, I don't know the exact words right at the moment, but it says in one of the amendments, I think it's the First Amendment, the government, federal government, will not have much to do with religion. It will not set up a religion, and it will not tell people what church to go to. Those are the two things in that amendment. Well, it turns out that a lot of people ask a lot of questions about that. What can we do, a lot of people say, on the atheistic side, what can we do to get rid of all these monuments on cemeteries to World War I soldiers that look like Christian crosses and that are on public governmental land? Well, the Supreme Court has just said you can't do anything about them. Forget it. They are going to stay there because they are historical, they are historic, there's a difference, and as time has gone by, they take on a significance that kind of transcends religion. The Supreme Court also said, I believe they said in the decision, we're not talking about new symbols on government land, we're talking about the old ones that have been there a while. You can't touch them. I greet that decision. I used to teach this subject, constitutional law, and I greet that decision. I think it's absolutely, totally right. Just because something has religious significance does not mean that it has no other significance, which really brings up the most gigantic point that I've been thinking about. How in the world, this is part 2 of today's talk, how in the world can we transition between mere politics and Supreme Court and the government and Trump and voting and elections and all that? How can we get beyond that? That's only politics. It used to be, at least in my opinion and in the opinion of people I studied with and whose books I read, it used to be that we put a lot of faith in politics, put faith in politics. If we vote for the right guy, if we get rid of George W. Bush, clearly the wrong guy, and vote for the other guy, Obama, things are going to get better because Obama is in touch with something special, something that goes beyond the really crude aspects of life. George W. Bush, I know I'm wandering around here, but believe it or not, I'll come back. George W. Bush had a very simple, I think foolish philosophy, which was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Let's invade Iraq. We know what happened there. And he did that out of sheer revenge. And his vice president, that lovable, really cute, adorable Mr. Cheney, probably got richer and richer and richer with every, hate to say it, death in Iraq. And since then, we're still not out of the mess. We got involved in politics, we got involved in war at the time, and it looked like Obama was going to bring us out of that kind of mess. Well, he didn't. We all know that. The wars in the Middle East have continued and continued and continued because Obama and others like him did not have a transcendental outlook, in my opinion, towards the Middle East and towards global politics. And you can get a transcendental outlook, by which I mean an overarching, all-inclusive outlook, by looking to some of the tenets of spirituality and religion. Don't ask me exactly what they are. I'm not here for that. I have to think about it a lot more. But what we have to do if we want to improve the country, it seems to me, is get out of the realm of politics and get into the territory that is currently occupied basically by religion, by meditation groups, and so forth and so on. I have to confess, that kind of approach has done me some good. I've gotten out of politics a lot. I used to be much more involved than I am now, and more involved in, I guess you could call it the spiritual world. That sounds awfully presumptuous, but it's something like that. And so let's come to part 3 of today, which is just a candid admission. I have no idea how to bring this about. If I were president or some presidential advisor, I could write a speech about it, and it would say, you know what, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, we need a lot of ideas on how we can transcend the politics of the day. And I think the answer is we need to transcend politics, and we need to bring more spirituality and religion into the political world rather than approach the political world as if it had all that much to do with the really vital issues of the day, the transcendental issues, the issues that transcend regular old everyday worries, such as when do I gas up my car? Or how much does gas cost today? The transcendental worries are a lot more important than that. And politicians rarely attack them. They make wonderful speeches, wonderful inauguration addresses, and then they forget all about it, at least ever since FDR, who I think, that stands for Franklin D. Roosevelt, by the way, great Democrat, author of the New Deal. He brought in, and the people who worked with him, a lot of the transcendental. Now, I'm not saying he was actually a closet minister or priest, but he brought in a lot of philosophy that focused people's ideas and minds on something that went beyond just everyday politics. For instance, when he said, the only thing we have to fear, this was in the Depression, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That helps to reorient people rather than saying something like what Hillary would probably have said. She would have come up with a bunch of policy ideas. And a bunch of policy ideas are not going to solve our problems. We have to reorient again towards something more transcendental. Well, tune in next time, and maybe I'll have the answer on how to do that.